fresh definition for who is a willful defaulter, and how soon will they be tagged as a willful defaulter from Reserve Bank of India?
That's right, Shweta. So, willful defaulters is something that I think came into existence when we heard of Vijay Mallya not paying back the loans that he had taken from multiple banks, and then the Nirav Modi saga that carried on, and then we've seen so many other willful defaulters as popularly referred to. But RBI
willful,
is now,
I mean, as the name suggests, willful is people who have the money,
absolutely,
are not ready
so that
to
is
pay up.
in the definition that the RBI is proposing, the change in norms which RBI is proposing. Who is a willful defaulter? Willful defaulter is somebody who has the money, has the ability to pay, but decides to not pay or divert funds. So that becomes definition number one, or point number one in the definition of willful defaulters. Number two, very interestingly, is the borrower should have a liability of 25 lakh rupees or above to be paid to the banks. So if your liability to the bank is, or from whichever lender you've borrowed money, is under 25 lakh rupees, you cannot be labeled as willful defaulter. So somebody runs away with a home loan of 20 lakh rupees will not be called a willful defaulter. The threshold begins at 25 lakh rupees. So 25 lakh rupees spending to a lender classifies you as willful defaulter. Now, what happens after you are classified as a willful defaulter? Number one, you need to be labeled as willful defaulter if you have not serviced your loan for a period of 6 months, and after you have been classified as a non-performing entity, a non-performing asset on accounts of the lender, within 6 months the tag of willful defaulter needs to be added. Now, what happens if you are able to repay that loan, even if as a willful defaulter you have repaid the bank the loan that you had borrowed for a period of 1 year, the bank should not lend any more debt to you. So this becomes another new addition, that you may be classified as willful defaulter. You may get out of that willful defaulter tag by paying your debt, but for a period of 1 year, the bank will not issue any fresh loan to you. And next in line, comes the question of restructuring of loans. A lot of times there are negotiations that both parties engage in. Now, RBI is telling banks and NBFCs, for that matter, very categorically that once you've classified somebody as a willful defaulter, the first two criteria met, no further renegotiating the loan terms, no further restructuring of the loan. Now, one more addition to this, equally important, I think, is the fact that once you have repaid your loan for a period of a year, you cannot seek any further loan. But it's not just the entity alone, it is also the management of that entity. So if it is a company which has defaulted, then the promoter of the company, the management which is in charge of running daily operations at the company, as well as any other subsidiaries of the company or any other joint ventures that the company has, which has not directly engaged in seeking that loan that it has defaulted on, all of these separate entities will also be labeled as willful defaulters. So it pretty much suggests that the promoter, the CEO, stroke CFO, as well as any other subsidiary that you have, all of it gets labeled as associates of the willful defaulter and hence deemed as willful defaulters themselves. So I think this, of course, is the
umbrella of willful default.
So you can't say that,
widened.
hey, I'm the CEO of the company, my company has defaulted, let my company not get any further loan, but I can go to a bank and I can borrow money for my personal expenses. You are also directly labeled as a willful defaulter. And you may say that this company has defaulted, but I have a subsidiary, and that subsidiary can go to the bank and take some debt. RBI says nothing doing. If you have a subsidiary, that subsidiary also gets classified as willful defaulter.
Very interesting. A very wider definition. And all of this comes on the back of the fact that for the last many years, in fact, prior to this government, for last decade or so, willful defaulter or willful default has become a talk of the town. A lot of people who have the ability to pay back do not pay back. The couple of issues, perhaps as journalists, we've been talking about, we've been trying to divulge into for past many years. Specifically in case of inflated mortgages, where a lot of people put a lot of land document, house documents, especially when it happened with not just Nirav Modi but Vijay Mallya as well, where lots of bungalows were put in for mortgage, but they did not actually match up to the cost once the company became insolvent and the mortgage had to be then utilized. You realize suddenly that the banks and the people were in cahoots with each other and the mortgage documents were inflated. All of that perhaps will also be taken into account, because that continues to be a major problem.
Yeah,
A person's ability to pay back is also depends largely on what sort of property they have, what sort of assets they have, movable, immovable, and specifically with immovable, there is a nexus that we see every now and then.
Sure. So, I believe, Shweta, you need checks and balances at every stage. Now, you cannot really expect a bank to have enough and more auditors across multiple facets of movable or immovable property to assess a fair value. Now, what happens in case I put my flat up as a mortgage today? If I want to seek a business loan and start of my own, if I put my house, up as mortgage today, what is the fair value of that flat today? And what is the value likely to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now when my loan term ends? Is there a formal check and balance in place? So what we really need is an ecosystem of independent evaluators. We need an ecosystem of independent assessors who are able to put a best case, worst case, average case scenario for a bank, for that property to be really accepted, or that asset to be accepted as mortgage, which should see through the quantum of loan that a borrower has taken. So I'm not sure if it would be fair to say that entities and financial institutions work in cahoots. I think there's just so much paperwork, non-digitized for a lot of immovable property, and property, based in some other city. You're taking a loan from a bank, in another city. Who assesses the value of the property,
bank is supposed to send a representative, which is what has come out, in fact, been unearthed in Vijay Mallya's case as well, where bank sends a representative every time you try and mortgage a property to go and assess the cost, and a lot of things are function of what a property costs.
Eventually, property, real estate, you will still need a real estate expert. You'll still need a
which
body,
doesn't happen.
Which may be happening, but then how does even that real estate organization, and even the bigger ones, give you a very, very concrete value of that property 20 years from now, 10 years from now? Is it going to appreciate? Logic tells you property will appreciate. Is there going to be a slump at a time when you really want to, dispose that property off and seek the money back? You don't know. So, I think it's pretty much like what happened in the US, the subprime crisis that happened in the US. Banks were lending money and people were buying property because interest rates were so low. And those properties, of course, became the mortgage for the bank, that if you are unable to pay your loan, the bank sells that property. But what happens? There's a slump in property. Banks are now inundated with acres and acres
of
worth
land and
property, which doesn't find takers.
Very low value.
So property is always a demand-supply game in any case.
Absolutely. But I think all in all, a good expansion of what is willful default and how willful defaulters will be tackled in days and months and weeks to come from here on, and tightening of news there on people who can pay back, who have an ability to pay back but do not end up paying back to the banks. Definition of willful default has now been widened.